The MLB draft is about 4 days away, and it might not just be between Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Pirates, brought to you by Sleeper.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To that Pirates podcast, everybody. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every day when Ethan has internet. Throw that in there, but we are at a friend's house, so very different backdrop here. But Craig, it's one of your more fun times of the year, sir. We are 4 days away from the first-year player draft for Major League Baseball. Found out over the offseason that the Pirates would be selecting number one for the second time in 3 years. Of course, we've been watching a certain number one overall pick play over the last couple of weeks in Henry Davis. There's been a lot of talk about this draft in particular, though, because of the fact that it appears there are two potentially generational talents in this draft in Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. And then when you talk to Pirates fans, it's pretty much who they want. It's between those two guys. But is that really it, though? I don't know. But we're going to start with Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens. I don't know if there's much that we really need to tell people, Greg, about these two guys, considering it seems like every Pirates fan has become an LSU fan all of a sudden. A very interesting combination there. But you know what you're getting from both of these guys. It just really depends on what Ben Cherington and the front office want to do. Dylan Cruz, on one hand, you're getting a guy who can play defensively in the outfield, has the bat to play. There's been the comparisons to a Freddie Freeman type and any like left-handed hitter right now that you could think of. There's all kinds of comparisons out there for Dylan Cruz. And then you have Paul Skeens, who some people could say could go to a bullpen in 3 months and be viable out there for a team that drafts him. You look at the teams that are at the top with Pittsburgh and Washington. Washington kind of looks at what Pittsburgh does and says, okay, maybe we get the other guy or maybe we don't. So where are your arguments right now, Craig, on taking either Dylan Cruz or Paul Skeens?
Well, Ethan, as anybody who follows the draft or has followed the draft for an extended period of time knows that in the end, a lot of this, comes down to money. Dylan Cruz reportedly wants near, at, or above the slot value. So you're looking at, somewhere in the ballpark of, say, 9.4 to upwards of $10 million to sign him. I've seen it out there that Paul Skeens, there was like rumblings that, there could be something that would be an underslot deal still around like, $9 million. I don't know how, you could really make a mistake signing either one of these guys. I just feel that people have, put the stamp on it that if it's Cruz and you want Skeens, it's a failure. If it's, if it goes the other way, then the Pirates somehow, have made a mistake. And just recently people putting it out there, the big thing is, this isn't 2021, in that year, there wasn't a clear, number one pick. And even in this one, even if you have a guy ranked number one, the other two guys, in my estimation, that being Paul Skeens and Wyatt Langford, are 1A and 1B. Behind that. So that's where the thing is there's not as much of a difference as anybody, kind of puts out there. If you want Dylan Cruz, you're getting a guy who's probably going to hit for more average, a little bit less power than Langford. And if you think he can stick at center field, obviously that would give the advantage to him. But once again, it's all about signability. If you can get Paul Skeens at say $9 million, save $700,000, and be able to pull a higher ranked prospect down the board to 42, a la 2021 with Anthony Solometto, then why wouldn't you try to do that if there's not that much of a difference between those picks? And like with a Wyatt Langford, I mean, I've seen the Pirates' ability to save as much as $1 to $1.2 million to use throughout the draft. So, I mean, yes, the 1-1 pick is extremely important. I always say, you don't have to completely hit on this pick, but you can't miss on this pick. If you pick one of those three guys, and even if you're in the Max Clark camp, I don't see that as a miss. I see that as something that really doesn't kind of gel within the timeline that, most people have out there. It's not like Ben Cherington has ever put a timeline out, but, most timelines that fans, bloggers, media members have, it really wouldn't fit into that. But as a guy who is seen as having possibly the best hit tool in this draft class, I don't see how that could be a miss. But with the draft, I mean, you need to get as much talent into the system as humanly possible.
Yep.
And if you say, give Dylan Cruz, he wants 10 million, people are saying, oh, just give him 10 million. Then you could be losing, I'd say, upwards of $1.5 million that could be used throughout the rest of the draft to bring talent into your team. To me, that's a pretty big risk, within itself, especially, I mean, everybody's saying, well, there could be an injury with an arm. I mean, look at Minnesota Twins, Royce Lewis has had, I believe, 2 Achilles injuries during this time that have kept him, out of, I don't know if it was the Achilles or the ACL. I always forget, somewhere in the leg, but he's just now making it to the majors, and he was seen as a fairly, can't miss prospect within the system. So baseball is a weird thing. You can't just put all your hopes on one guy. I mean, we saw the Angels do that with Mike Trout for a number of years. Another player that I've seen, Dylan Cruz compared to, but then I've also seen Dylan Cruz compared to Grady Sizemore, who wasn't a terrible player with the Indians, 24.7 WAR throughout his career, but he wasn't that, quote unquote, we throw out generational talent, but then you see Adley Rutschman, you see, Andrew Vaughn, a Golden Spikes winner. You see Spencer Torkelson struggling. So I don't know how you call like Dylan Cruz a quote unquote generational talent when I can throw a stone and hit 4 guys within the last, 10 to 15 years who have the same skill set. To me, generational talent would basically be like, this is the best guy that you've drafted in the past 30 to 40 years. If this guy's Ken Griffey Jr., then okay. I mean, I can kind of see that. But this generational talent thing, I just can't really get behind that when I can name at least 3 to 4 guys he's compared to who I've seen play. And, I don't know, man. That to me, that's just something. It's like one of those buzzwords that I could do without.
Yeah, and it is a buzzword, definitely. And I also feel like when you're considering generational talent into account, go to other sports. You look at generational talents that would be considered. You look at in the NBA, 2003 came along. There was no doubt in anybody's mind that LeBron James was getting drafted to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it had nothing to do with he was from Ohio. He could have been from Alaska, and they would have taken him if he was the same exact player that he was. Look at the MLB draft. You look at Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper was a generational guy when he came out. Steven Strasburg was one of those guys that was considered a generational pitcher and has had a very phenomenal career outside of the fact now that he's very, very, very in the deep end in the injury pool. We'll get into my thoughts on this in just a moment. But guys, we have a new sponsor on the show. Lots of new sponsors all the time here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. This one just so happens to be Sleeper. Get up to a $100 match on your first deposit on mobile only at sleeper.com/promo code locked on, because Sleeper is a fantasy sports plus real money gaming app focused on bringing people together through sports and gaming. Sleeper has become the fastest organically growing fantasy platform in the world with over 5 million active users, while earning some of the highest levels of engagement per user in the industry. At Sleeper, it's not just about sports, it's about building personal connections and lasting memories. Sleeper Picks is our real money product that connects friends over picks. Choose 2 to 8 of your favorite players from pregame, live, or even across different sports. Pick higher or lower than the predicted stats. Only on Sleeper can you get up to 100 times payouts, and you can share them with your friends and get rewarded together. So swing for the fences on Sleeper Picks, and you can win up to a 100 times your money. Use promo code Locked On, and Sleeper will match your first deposit up to $100 and predict the hottest baseball stats like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and much more to cash in on your daily fantasy baseball skills. Yes, Sleeper is very awesome. I'm going to be getting on there pretty soon. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. And lately, I'm just going to start putting Nick Gonzalez over half a hit. But my thoughts on this. So, on the thumbnail of this show, you're going to see 4 people. You're going to see Dylan Cruz. You're going to see Paul Skeens. You're going to see Wyatt Langford. And you're going to see Max Clark. Those are the 4 guys you're going to see on the thumbnail of this episode once you click it with me and Craig. Walker Jenkins is another guy that not a lot of people talk about that could be in play for this pick. Something that I want to throw out to everybody here, though, and Craig, you probably understand this a lot better than me, but it's something that I've been able to figure out as of late with how the MLB draft works. 2 agents, Craig, and I'm sure you know this already, 2 agents for the top 6 players in this draft, including Rhett Lauder, I believe, represent the top 6 guys on MLB.com's MLB draft rankings. So now, is it weird that all of a sudden we're hearing things about Dylan Cruz wants to go to Washington, or Paul Skeens will sign underslot, or Wyatt Langford will sign underslot? Why? Because these guys want their clients to be picked where they're supposed to be picked. Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens are probably the 2 that they are going to debate on all the way up until the last very second they can to submit the pick. That's just how it's going to be. Wyatt Langford, as you mentioned, brings a lot more power than Dylan Cruz does. He's a phenomenal player. If it wasn't for Skeens and Dylan Cruz, he'd probably be the consensus number 1 pick here. Max Clark, again, I agree with you. I don't think Max Clark is the guy for the Pirates at 1, just because being 18 years of age, when's he going to get here? I mean, they drafted Termarr Johnson last year, but that's still a full year ahead of a Max Clark. And then Max Clark doesn't get here until he's like 21, 22. You can make the argument that the Pirates window will be almost over by that, based off of just historical standards of what happens to these low spending teams. So then you look at Cruz and Skeens, and you have to make the decision. Do you want a right-handed outfield bat, which is ironically something the Pirates don't have in their system really at all? I mean, you look at every single outfield, and I know you don't draft for need at 1-1. You don't ever do it. But when you look at your system and all you see is lefties as your outfielding options, at some point you're going to want to add a righty in there. Maybe that's the thought process they use if they take Dylan Cruz. But then the thought process that I share with a lot of people is when you look at a guy like Paul Skeens, and I mentioned Rhett Lauder. Rhett Lauder, phenomenal pitcher. Not even close to as good as Paul Skeens is. Paul Skeens is the best pitching prospect we have seen come out in quite a while. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I don't know how far their timeline would go with that, but Paul Skeens is a dude. I mean, you want to just look at his grades already: 80 fastball, 70 slider, 50 changeup, 55 control, 65 overall prospect. The dude's legit. And I think one of the things that a lot of Pirates fans are getting smoke screened right now by Craig is you look at the idea that I just said you don't draft for need. But then you hear all the rumblings about Quinn Priester. You hear about Jared Jones. You hear about J.P. Massey, another guy that has been playing very well as of late. You hear about Anthony Solometo. Thomas Harrington's a really good pitcher in the system already as well. But Skeens is arguably better than all of those guys right now. I would make that argument. Like, you could make the viable argument that Skeens is better than Quinn Priester at this current moment in time. And that's without seeing him face anybody at the minor league level. Scouts don't just go around saying that a guy could jump into the bullpen in 2 months and be perfectly fine. I think my thought process on it, Craig, is that Skeens is the kind of guy the Pirates will never have the opportunity to take again unless they have the number 1 pick again. And you know this, they're not going to go out and spend $25 million on a starting pitcher in free agency. They're not going to do that with a bat either. So that's where I'm here to tell a lot of people is that either way that they go, they're getting somebody they'll never have an opportunity to get in winter meetings, in free agency, via trade. So either way that they go is fine, I think. But just rationalize it on both sides is what I would say, rather than saying, oh, if they go Cruz instead of Skeens, it's a mockery. If they go Skeens instead of Cruz, it's bad. It's like, either way, the Pirates are in a very good and very bad situation because whatever they do is awesome. But the fact that another player will go to Washington right behind them and also be awesome, those two players are going to get compared to each other all the time. Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens in their careers, Craig, are going to get compared constantly, and they don't even play near the same position. Not even close. And I mean, if you're going to ask me and put me on the spot right now, if somebody was to ask me who would I take if I was the general manager of the team, I would take Paul Skeens. Just because I think you need pitching, and we're seeing that at this very moment with this team. You can never have enough pitching when you're a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I know, again, you don't draft for need. There's going to be good pitchers all through the draft. But none of those guys are Paul Skeens.
Yeah, and with Paul Skeens, I mean, one thing that, came out on the MLB network that a lot of people probably weren't aware of is that, everybody sees Paul Skeens in an LSU uniform and don't realize that he played for Air Force for 2 years, was a two-way player, doesn't have as many miles on the arm as many pitchers, didn't do the travel circuit. He wasn't like, these guys that you don't know what happened to their arms while they were, playing for their travel ball teams. I mean, this is a guy that legitimately, this is the first year his arm was used in the way it was used. Does that mean that, he won't ever, need Tommy John or never have an oblique injury or even any type of forearm injury? Absolutely not. But like I said, it also doesn't mean that, Dylan Cruz, just because he's, a great athlete, or, Wyatt Langford, who I think he was a 3-sport athlete in high school. He's a linebacker. I mean, the dude's built like a tank. It doesn't mean that those injuries won't ever come about. So, I mean, I don't know. To me, I am on the fence of, it's not even who I want or who they're going to take, but to me, it's just like, if it's any of the top 3 guys, Cruz, Skeens, Langford, the 3 guys, in my opinion, I really can't be mad at that pick whatsoever. I also want to see how the draft board works out after that. But I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be upset. I mean, everybody that's Cruz or bust or Skeens or bust, and if they take, Langford over Cruz, then they're morons and they're cheap and all those different other things that come out there. I mean, the people can get their clicks however they want during that point in time. But to me, one of those 3 guys, and even if it's Max Clark, and depending on who they would get in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, I could be talked into, that's why he's in there. And just with Ben Cherington and the way that he talks, I mean, I didn't know if we were ever going to see a high school player picked, and he kind of bucked that in the system with Tamar Johnson. To me, Ben Cherington has always been a man who talks about waves. He doesn't talk about windows. So it's the system from top to bottom. It's going to be where these guys fit in. So, I mean, and I do see Cruz, Skeens, and Langford as guys that could be regular contributors I'm in my ETA of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Could Skeens come in and play in the bullpen, right now? Absolutely. Ben Cherington has kind of gone on the record and said that, with the number of innings he's pitched, with, the stress he's put on his arm in this year, it would be like almost any other pitcher that the Pirates pick in the draft is that, it's shut down. We'll see you when it's ramp up time, and we'll see you in spring training. So, I mean, that's not even like a question. And even, the position the Pirates are in, still quote unquote within, striking distance. I don't even think that would change their mind. I mean, for God's sake, you can look back to Steven Strasburg's career when the Nationals shut him down when they were going to be a playoff team. So, and everybody that's saying, I just going back, I don't know, all the stuff that's in my head. My head's kind of like I would probably equate it to to my dryer that sits behind this wall here. Is everything's just kind of flipping around, and whatever I pull out, is kind of what's on my mind right now. Bryce Harper was generational talent. Bryce Harper didn't take the Nationals to the World Series. He wasn't the one that put them over the top. So, I mean, it's a team game. It's a system that you want to have as much depth in as possible. Like I said, after the 1-1, I'm almost as interested to see how the rest of the draft plays out for the Pirates as I am with who they're going to pick 1-1. And for me, Cruz, Skeens, Langford, any of them, I could almost throw a dart at it at this point in time and say I'd be happy with any of those guys.
Yeah, and then you also look at the last two Pirates first overall picks, because they've had it twice in the past, can I do math, 15 years. We remember who the one before Henry Davis was. That was Garrett Cole. I know a lot of people in Pittsburgh don't like Garrett Cole. But Garrett Cole was a very good pitcher for this team for quite a while. Pitched here for a while. Did it work out in the end? No. He goes to Houston. He wins a World Series. Or did he win a World Series? I don't remember if he won a World Series in Houston. I always forget that one. They got Joe Musgrove out of it. Joe Musgrove eventually got traded too. Henry Davis, you can't really make an assessment yet. Henry Davis has been really good. He's done good things while up here so far. He's played a secondary position to what he's accustomed to doing, which I think he's actually pretty good out there in right field. But I don't know, does history play a factor here as well? I mean, you look at like teams that have invested in pitching very early in the draft, and the way it's works out pretty well for some of these teams. But then you've also seen teams go after hitters pretty early, like a Jackson Holiday, who comes to mind, Adley Rutschman, who comes to mind. Henry Davis can come to mind as of right now because I think he's going to be good. So does history for the Pirates play a factor here as well, Craig?
I don't think Ben Cherington looks any further back than, I don't know, this morning when he wakes up and if he's a coffee drinker, has his cup of coffee. And to tell you the truth, I think he's more of just forward thinking as to, what this can do for the team moving forward, what this can do for depth within the system, what this can do for, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I think as soon as the draft's over, he's got a pretty busy thing coming up with the trade deadline as well. So I think that he's one of those guys that doesn't have, he doesn't look back too far and he doesn't look forward too far. He kind of just lives in what's going on in the moment and what he can do at that point in time to make the team better. If that works out, I mean, we'll see. If it doesn't, we'll also see. I mean, people can say, this team isn't doing as well as they should be this year, but I mean, with all the injuries and stuff that they've experienced, I could see them doing a heck of a lot worse. So,
Yeah.
I kind of like Ben Cherington's demeanor. I'm not saying he's good at his job. I just kind of like his demeanor in that he's not like, he doesn't really let a whole lot of stuff affect his decision making. He has what he believes and what his team believes. I always call it Ben Cherington and company, Steve Sanders, just a decent amount of people in the assistant GM roles, and what they can do in the scouting department to be able to get this done. And right now you have to rely on yourself, rely on your scouts that, if the scouts are saying, hey, Dylan Cruz is this and Wyatt Langford's this, and the distance isn't that far, you better be able to do that. And also, I mean, everybody always forgets about, development. To me, that's, almost as important, if not more important, than scouting at this point in time, because if you can't develop the players that you scout and that, you believe to be better, then, I mean, kind of in some ways, it doesn't matter who you pick. If you're not going to be able to get them the best out of them and the most out of them, at the highest level. So I don't know, man. I feel like I always say, like, I can't wait for this to be over, but the discussion never ends. As you said, I mean, we're still talking about, if Henry Davis was a good, pick at 1-1, if he never moves the catcher, was that like a miss? Talk, like you said, you're going to be comparing Cruz to Langford to Skeens. They're going to be looking at Max Clark. Everybody's going to be bringing this up for years to come. To me, I kind of just want to, do what Ben Cherington does, move on to, the trade deadline. And after that, move on to hopefully O'Neal Cruz coming back and seeing if he, has the mobility to move back into shortstop, or if he's going to be a DH, or if he's back at all this season, if he suffers any setbacks, God forbid. So, I mean, I'm glad to be talking about this. It's a very exciting time. But I mean, I would just kind of caution people to, kind of where you get your information on this type of stuff. And if you see somebody completely overreacting and making, complete black or white statements on stuff, I would kind of steer clear of them and do what Ethan and myself do. I mean, we're giving you information that we found out from, experts within the field, not, somebody with a, random Twitter following. So it's really just kind of just, seeing who they pick, seeing how the draft plays out, and then, seeing how those guys develop within the system. This is kind of it's a very fun time of year. It shouldn't be something that is, uber stressful or, causing half of Pirates Twitter or Discord or Threads or whatever is going to be cool, like, in the next month or so, to throw that on its end. But I'm pretty sure it will.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, as I mentioned before, tons of draft coverage coming your way throughout the entire weekend. Tomorrow, I'm going to have Locked On Nationals and Lindsey Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects on the show. I'm also going to be stepping over to KALB News Channel 5's Mary Margaret Ellison, who covers the LSU Tigers, to have me on and talk about Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. Saturday, we're going to cook something up, and then at some point, we're also going to have a nice little video from our host of Locked On Gators on Wyatt Langford. So lots of fun stuff going on. Obviously, at Inside the Bucs Basement, me and Craig are always writing stuff over there, so please check it out. He'll have minor leagues news and brews at some. Did you already do it today?
I'm doing it tomorrow on Friday. That's going to be focusing on, surprisingly, the FCL in Bradenton, because I already did my draft preview with Joe Doyle last week, so everybody can still check that out.
Nice. So that'll all be there for Craig. Obviously, you guys know where to find us on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Inside the Bucs Basement. Also at Locked On Pirates. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in on Thursday, July 6th. Have a wonderful rest of your day. My name is Ethan Smith. That's Craig Toth, and we'll see you on the flip side.